So I am not a minimalist. I'm actually a really big fan of things. Am I a thingist? But for the past month, my lovely Galaxy S22 has been in a drawer, and in its place, I've been using the CAT S22 Flip, which is obviously a flip phone, but its fun feature is that it is actually running Android. Well, not quite Android, it's Android Go, but we'll get to that. So why did I do this? Well, about a month ago, I was realizing that I was getting kind of anxious whenever I'd get the buzz on my phone for notification, Instagram or Twitter or, whatever it is, and I was feeling this increasing sense of duty to keep my notifications at a sort of inbox zero, and it was kind of like I was working to keep the phone happy instead of the other way around, which does sound ridiculous, but we all get into a funky rut sometimes. I'd learned a few months prior that the CAT Flip existed and was very tempted to try it out as a daily driver, but it didn't really make sense at the time. But now, being uncertain if my smartphone usage was in a completely healthy place, it seemed like a good excuse to take the plunge and try this phone out for a month, which was a pretty easy yes, because this thing only cost me 80 Canadian dollars on Amazon. I think it's refurbished, but you can't really even tell. It was in the original packaging and all that. And yeah, $80 outright. So if you're looking for a phone for your dad and he doesn't really care to have a nice smartphone, then this might be the phone to get him, because you're not going to get much cheaper than 80 bucks. I was oddly excited to unbox this phone, not because the packaging was all that flashy, but because I was just so incredulous at seeing the Android setup screen scroll by on a phone that really doesn't feel like it should be running Android. The coolest thing my last flip phone ran was a Java edition of Transformers, so that's about the coolest thing I expect a flip phone to be able to do. My first impressions of this phone were how chunky it is. It is about the size of two iPhone 4s laid on top of each other, and I actually pulled out my old flip phones, which I still had, because I'm a bit of a tech hoarder, and even compared to my ancient Motorola, this one still beat them out. Along with that, it definitely has a bit of weight to it, like holding it in comparison to my S22. I would say this one is actually heavier. There was a point where I actually dropped it, and in the other room, my wife thought that I had fallen, so it, yeah, definitely has a little heft to it. So after setup, I got to work installing my everyday apps, popping in the SIM card, and to make sure I get the most out of the experiment, setting a very aggressive Android focus mode. And a nice thing about this phone is that it's running a fairly stock version of Android, so you get to use the native Google version of the focus modes, which I tend to prefer over the Samsung ones, because in the native Android version, you just need to tell it what apps are typically noisy, and then check those off, tell it when you don't want to hear from them, and you're good to go. Whereas on Samsung's version, you actually need to tell it which apps you do want to hear from, and then give it a certain time range. So for the way that I use them, I have to keep this really long whitelist of all the apps that I do want to hear from, just to block out Instagram notifications during certain parts of the day. Another point in stock Android's favor for focus modes is when you want to open up a noisy app, even if you're within the quiet time, it'll offer to let you open up the app for just 5 minutes and then shut itself back down. And so that was really handy if I needed to action a notification I knew was inside an app, but I didn't want to get sucked into it. I could just hit yes, use for 5 minutes, do what I needed to do, and then hop back out. So that definitely helped prevent the vacuum effect of certain apps. So with that feature, I ended up setting it so that I only had a 3-hour window in the evenings for my social apps, which included Messenger, Instagram, Twitter, I think a few others, which was super refreshing, except for when I missed out on buying 2 Crystal Xboxes for $100 because the seller messaged during my quiet period. So there was that. Alright, so we are now a full week in with the flip phone, and it's been pretty good. The novelty's definitely wearing off a bit. I definitely had some fun getting some looks out of people, the pharmacist and friends, when I just pull out my flip phone and start using it like, there's nothing different. I'm just, sorry, I gotta take a call. They're like, the heck just happened? There have been some frustrations though. Trying to get an urgent 2-factor code off of my app during a call was pretty difficult because the screen is just too small to load all the elements properly. So I actually can't see the 2-factor code. I have to copy it and then paste it into a text field somewhere so that I can actually see the 2-factor code, and all that within the 30 seconds before the code expires. So that's adding a little bit of stress, which is sort of the opposite of what we're hoping to do with the experiment. It's supposed to reduce screen-based stress, but because screens are a part of my job on a day-to-day basis, that has been one annoyance. So after the first week, I was starting to view the phone more objectively, both with its pros, like the 2 to 4 day battery, the dedicated button I could use for flashlight and Google Assistant, and how satisfying it is to end a call by slapping the phone closed. And after a week, I also started to notice the cons, which is a decent list. First, like we mentioned, it's running Android Go versus full Android, which only eliminates a few features that you wouldn't think you'd want, but one of those is notification mirroring, which might not sound important, except when you realize that it means you can't open your Google Messages on the desktop app, and I was kind of banking on that so I could text from my keyboard instead of having to use the tiny screen. And even rougher, I realized that because it's running Android Go, because of the lack of notification mirroring and maybe a few other missing features, I actually could not pair my smartwatch to it, which means now I couldn't see text previews or get super accurate pedometer information, my sleep sleep tracking and all the benefits I've come to enjoy from my smartwatch, and the Samsung Wear app just said not supported in the Play Store, so that was a pretty big con. I should also note that although the 2 gigs of RAM got the job done in most cases, there were some apps that would just sort of give up and jump you back to the home screen, which the T-Mobile official FAQ says, reboot the phone if you have problems, so they know the RAM's a little bit lacking. One app that did struggle pretty hard though was Notion. I could not reliably get Notion up. I just started resorting to throwing things into Google Keep to then put in Notion when I was at a more powerful device later. Another con that might be a little bit obvious is the camera is just okay, think iPod Touch from 2012 kind of quality. It was good enough for me to scan a benefits document to submit for a claim, so it'll get the job done, but yeah, don't be planning to take your next profile picture with this one. Also, with the phone not having NFC, that meant there was no Google Tap, and so that plus my smartwatch not being able to be paired, I definitely need to make sure I bring my real plastic with me to the grocery store. One more con to round out the list, which is a pretty big one, and it's just the simple fact that with the small screen, there are some apps where there's just too much it's trying to put on the screen that it can't handle properly. One key example of this was when I was trying to use Facebook Messenger to reply to a marketplace deal, which if you follow the channel, you know that happens a lot. And if you've used Facebook Marketplace, you know that when you're talking to someone, it'll show you a preview of the product you're talking about at the top, and then you can carry on below that with a Messenger convo as per usual. But on this phone, when it's trying to put the navigation bar, then the item preview, then the conversation, and then you want to use the on-screen keyboard, you actually cannot see what you're typing while using the on-screen keyboard. So you have the fun decision of either using the swipe keyboard without seeing your preview and hope you typed it correctly. Then you can close the on-screen keyboard, use the arrow keys to go back through the message and see if you got it right. If you didn't, then you can arrow key over to the word that was wrong, use the C/clear button to backspace the incorrect characters, and then use the swipe keyboard to blindly try and put the correct word in before getting the message correctly. Or if you don't want that hassle, you can switch over to the built-in T9/number pad keyboard, which does work like it expects straight out of 2005, but then you're using T9 typing, so the choice is yours. Funny enough, I did resort to that mode of typing though a little more often than you think, especially certain apps like my banking app required me to use the physical keyboard to punch in the amount that I was going to email someone, but then I could use the on-screen keyboard for entering their email. So just some weird opinionations and eccentricities you have to find your way through with this phone. Throughout the majority of the month, I didn't feel very held back by this phone, especially as it sort of trained me to use the small screen as a sort of pager to see a notification, take note of it, ignore it, and then wait until I was at a tablet or laptop later, which tended to be when I had more free time anyway to actually enjoy talking to that person or responding to that meme or whatever. I've seen other dumb phone experiments where one of the key things that the experimenter was held back by was that the phone couldn't do things like Google Maps very well or common things like that, but that is actually not the case with this phone. It did run Google Maps like a champ. I used it more than once to navigate around, and yeah, worked perfectly fine, so that's cool. Also, fun fact, while this phone is sitting in your car's dashboard mount, the camera is so high that it actually works as a really good little dash cam, which was a random find, but there you go, if you're looking for that. Throughout the month, some things just never stop being fun, like seeing the YouTube app running on this thing just feels wrong. Being able to watch shorts and videos on a phone that feels like it was pulled out of a time capsule is just delightful to look at. I don't know, it's hard to explain. I also found that because this phone is so tough, I was allowed to just kind of throw it across the room when I felt like it, and he was fine, like a champ. I don't necessarily encourage that if you want to keep the phone nice, but if you intend to just use it and abuse it for 30 days and see how you like it, then chuck as you please. Depending on what your goals are for your cell phone usage, this could very well be the phone for you. For $80, your wallet will thank you. And funny enough, during this experiment, a couple of friends of mine actually bought the phone themselves to cut down on TikTok and other apps that they were just tired of scrolling, which this phone will definitely help with. However, for me, being the super nerd that I am, I do really appreciate having my smartwatch to take analytics of my sleep and track my steps accurately, enough screen real estate to do a bit of work when I'm away from my desk, and more niche features like phone HDMI out so that I always have an Android TV box when I'm on vacation and I don't trust that the programming in the hotel room is good. So when the month was up, I did return to my Samsung, but I did adjust the focus modes based on what I learned from the CAT Flip experiment, even though the Samsung focus modes are a little more annoying to set up. So I still get just the short window in the evening where I can get my various memes and pings on the noisier apps, and I've also been pretty aggressive in turning off notifications altogether for apps that I realized just I didn't really need that anyway, but I do get Messenger notifications all day now. We're not missing another Crystal Xbox. But I'm curious what you all think. Would you use this phone full time, or would you buy it for a 30-day sort of phone cleanse like I did? Let me know in the comments below, and also let me know if you want to see a separate video where I cover all the many tips and tricks that I learned while using this phone, because there are, as I mentioned, many eccentricities that are handy to know going in. Subscribe to help out the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.